Hello, and welcome to Gateway to Privacy, a podcast from global law firm K&L Gates, where we discuss the latest developments and best practices in today's data protection, privacy, and security industry. We hope you enjoy this discussion. Please reach out to suggest topics or guests, or with questions about data privacy law.
Hi out there, everyone, and welcome to this very special and exciting brand new episode of the Gateway to Privacy podcast. By way of introduction, I'm Thomas Nietsch. I'm a privacy partner in the Berlin office of K&L Gates. And I'm not alone here, but I brought some external expertise to shed some light on today's topic, which is co-regulation under GDPR. So without much further ado, I'm happy to hand over and welcome my co-speakers, Jelena and Gabriela. Please introduce yourselves briefly.
Hello, Thomas. Thank you so much for having us here with you today. My name is Jelena Kljujic. I am Cisco's EMEA privacy officer responsible for our market access, compliance, and differentiation pillars within the EMEA. Gabriela, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Jelena, and thank you, Thomas. Really a pleasure to be here. I'm Gabriela Mercuri, and I'm a managing director at Scope Europe. I'll not give any, spoiler alert. I'll not explain too much of what we do at Scope Europe right now because we will dig into that one farther on. So I'll keep it short right now and hand it back over to Thomas.
Yeah, that's great and good spirit. So thank you both for joining me, and it's really great to have you here. As mentioned before, our topic today is a bit of not so much in focus of everyone's mind when talking about GDPR and privacy, but I think it's still an important topic which deserves some closer inspection. And for those of you out there who may not be so familiar with the term self-regulation or co-regulation, this is basically a voluntary private enforcement regime for ensuring compliance with GDPR or any other regulation, which supplements or specifies the statutory provisions and the administrative regular enforcement regime. At least under GDPR, the most relevant and accepted tool for co-regulation are the so-called codes of conduct, which play an important role here. And that's where I would start to hand over to you both. So what are these codes of conduct under GDPR and how do they work? Can you explain that?
Sure. Happy to start here. As we all know, GDPR is this one-size-fits-all regulation, right? And the upside of this approach is definitely that the regulators stayed away from technical elements. And by that, they were able to future-proof the regulation as much as possible, of course. And the downside is that it led to very vague provisions. And I'm sure Jelena and Thomas can talk a lot about the challenges that those very vague provisions have created. That triggered a lot of fear, a lot of legal uncertainty to all sorts of businesses operating in the EU. And understanding this core challenge from the beginning, the regulator has incorporated some tools into the GDPR already to optimize its implementation in specific processing contexts. So codes of conduct are one of them, alongside, for instance, certifications, which are more for a lot of people, especially when we're talking about the digital markets, let's say, they might be more familiar with certifications, but they are right there together with codes of conduct. So according to GDPR, codes of conduct, they can be drafted by associations and other bodies representing categories of controllers or processors. And these instruments, if approved by the authorities, they can be used as a legal proof of compliance towards customers, towards data protection authorities. So there is huge added value right there, right? So what is to keep it short here, but I always like to emphasize what is the goal here. The goal is to specify, and GDPR is quite clear when it comes to that. And the word specify is very important because I constantly have this question, but why codes of conduct? Like, do you need to go beyond a regulation? No, that's not necessarily what you need to do. You can, if you find that a certain context requires going beyond. However, the goal here is to really specify. Once you have these vague provisions, you need to create clear guidance on how to implement the regulation within a certain context. So, yeah, in a nutshell, this is what GDPR puts forward when it comes to codes of conduct.
If I may jump in here, thanks, Gabriela, for that summary. To add on top of what Gabriela just said, I think it may be useful to take a step back and just look at the environment we find ourselves in. Now, what I mean by this is that we live in an environment of an extremely complex technologies that are influencing digital transformation, that are influencing the way we live, play, learn, work. And this influence of the technology and making it such a prominent, having technology play such a prominent role in our lives, make it so much difficult to actually build trust. And when it comes to codes of conduct, there are two aspects here that I would like to highlight in this environment. The first one is that the market, our customers, our partners, end users are not satisfied with an implicit trust. They want vendors or technology providers to demonstrate how they meet different legal, technical, standard requirements that we find out there, which makes it in particular very challenging when you have a complex technology which meets a complex regulation, such as general data protection regulation. So for us, codes of conduct and their ability to specify the requirements and help us demonstrate compliance in a standardized and widely accepted way is definitely a benefit. Another significant benefit of the codes of conduct is the ability to actually not only specify the requirements, but translate them into tangible, measurable controls that we are able to scale to, in a scalable manner, integrate into our engineering processes. So not only do our customers have a vehicle or a mechanism to verify that we walk the talk, it is also easier for our engineers and product management teams to understand what is it that the GDPR requires them to do in a particular context, which is, a continuous challenge. GDPR has been around for several years now. However, this contextual applicability of data protection principles, it remains a continuous challenge because technology evolves, processing context evolves, and we are continuously looking for scalable and sustainable ways to demonstrate compliance with the underlying GDPR expectations.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's very true. And just one more point I would like to emphasize, because that's what I know from the lawyer's world when clients reach out to me. The basic question is always, I can read the GDPR. That's not a problem. But what do I have to do in detail? And that's where a lot of GDPR compliance issues stem from, I believe. And if you have a code of conduct in place, which defines for a specific question those tasks and to-dos, it's like a checkbox. And as you said, Jelena, it's much easier for product designers, developers, coders, whoever, if they have clear technological requirements, they can check and say, okay, yes, I have that. And the result is then, okay, if you have that, then you have the proof of concept that you are compliant with this specific GDPR provision. So I think that explains quite good how this generally works. Gabriela, perhaps one more question for you in this regard. We talked about the content, but rather about the formalities. What needs to be done to have this legal effect of a code of conduct? Can you please explain that?
Yes, sure. So for a code to become operational, there are two elements that must be fulfilled under GDPR. So codes of conduct are actually not something new in the data protection environment. They were already present under the directive. However, GDPR puts forward a much more robust framework by adding Article 41 to the equation. So you have Article 40, which tackles the approval and the code of conduct itself. And you have Article 41, which tackles the monitoring body, an independent third party that assesses compliance and that needs to be accredited to do so by the Data Protection Authority. And you can have a national code of conduct, which goes through the approval process with the National Data Protection Authority. And you also can have a transnational code of conduct whenever you tackle more member states, and that needs to go through the EDPB, which is a pretty robust, can be also a very lengthy process. As you know, it is not easy to find consensus among all member states, and this is required to go through the DPB. But yes, you also definitely increase. It's a very important process as well, because once you have those vague provisions that you were discussing, if you bring all member states to discuss and they are able to agree on a set of technical and organizational measures that are adequate for that processing context, that adds a lot of legal certainty, what we are looking for. So it is the approval process and the accreditation process are both quite robust and difficult to put it in very simple words, but the outcome is worth it, definitely is worth it.
Yes, and I think this is a perfect occasion. You said you didn't want to spoil anything during your introduction, but this brings us a bit more, I believe, to the famous, or not famous, but I guess a lot of people have heard about it, the EU Cloud Code of Conduct, which Scope Europe is the body taking care of that code and having reached the approval in front of the EBPB, actually. So you are acting as managing director of Scope Europe, going a bit away from the generic code of conduct concept. Can you please explain a bit more what is this EU Code of Conduct specifically about, and what is Scope Europe's role?
Sure. So yes, the EU Cloud Code of Conduct, we often mention that the code is a proof of concept or lighthouse project, because indeed this was the first code to become operational, meaning to have the approval and accreditation. So Scope Europe is the monitoring body of the code as well as its secretariat. So we also worked on the development. We led the negotiations with the authorities and so forth. So we were involved from the very beginning, which is not a given. Not necessarily you have the monitoring body and the code owner are not necessarily together throughout the whole process, but this was the case for us, and that was very, very interesting and very important, I believe, to create a coherent framework, because those are separate processes, drafting the code and creating a monitoring framework for it. But if you think about it, it's very important to create provisions that can be assessed, that can be properly assessed. So to do those two processes concomitantly was very helpful to achieve a final product that is actually workable and that can be implemented. And I will definitely hand over to Jelena to talk about this element. But in a nutshell, again, the EU Cloud Code of Conduct is a European-wide code of conduct that tackles Article 28 and all its related articles for the cloud sector. So it was the first one to become operational in 2021, being unanimously approved by all member states within the EDPB. And since then it has been, let's say, leading the way. There are not many examples out there of codes of conduct that have been successful. I think the EU Cloud CSC has been definitely very very successful. But I'm a little bit biased, so I think I will give the floor to Jelena to talk a little bit about that one, and then we can dig into the specificities as we develop.
Happy to. And thank you, Gabriela, for all the hard work you're doing. Coming to the codes of conduct and the EU Cloud Code of Conduct in particular, as most of you already know, Cisco is a cloud service provider with a pretty large and diverse portfolio of services. And we are led by principles of transparency, accountability, and fairness when it comes to personal data processing within our products, offers, and services. And I think that one of the primary objectives of us participating in the EU Cloud Code of Conduct and having services adherent under it is to enable our customers, who are the controllers under the GDPR and Article 28, to actually meet their compliance obligations by making it easy for them to verify all the obligations we as a processor fulfill under the code with the help of the controls catalog that the code comes with. So for us, this is definitely one of the main motivators. And I also mentioned that Cisco does have level 3 adherent services. So we have recently acquired level 3 for WebEx, and just for our listeners to understand, there is no substantive difference between levels of adherence under the EU Cloud Code of Conduct. The difference between the levels is in number of the independent reviews or checks that the controls go through, especially when it comes to evidence that are shared in support of the controls under the code. And we have decided to go with level 3, mostly because, yes, we do want to help our customers meet their compliance obligations, but we also consider data protection by design and by default and our obligations under the GDPR as an ongoing exercise. So it is important for us to also learn from this process, to understand what we can do better, to improve, to always invest and try to understand what our drawbacks are, where we can do more to make our products more trustworthy, to make our customers comfortable with our technology, but also to help out the market. Because we don't only keep the lessons learned from compliance with the EU Cloud Code of Conduct for us, we actually integrate the EU Cloud Code of Conduct controls into Cisco's controls framework, which is a framework that is based on a principle: build once, use many times, meaning that if you are running ISO 27000 certification or ISO 27701 or 2717, 2718, and there are overlapping controls between those certifications and the EU Cloud Code of Conduct, you can build your proof once and use it across all of these different instances. And we have published the Cisco's controls framework, cloud controls framework online. It's available to all of our customers, partners, and industry participants to use as they see fit. And it's one of the first frameworks that is as broad, that includes data protection controls, next to security standards and other requirements, which puts data protection at the heart of everything we do.
Yeah, and you touched upon a very important point, I believe, and that brings me to the specific setup of this EU Cloud Code of Conduct. It's meant for cloud service providers who usually are not controllers, but are rather in the field of processors. And they have loads of customers also in the EU. And this brings me to the point: what is the benefit for those companies, the customers, using your services, not Cisco's, but any of those under the code? And that is actually what we said earlier. It's kind of a security, because under Article 28 as a controller, you have certain obligations to ensure that your processor is capable of meeting certain standards and is reliable and so on. And if your service provider is approved under the EU Cloud Code of Conduct, you can more or less rest assured, because this has been exactly what has been checked in the approval process by the monitoring body. And so this helps not only in kind of intangible trust among customers and service providers, but also in a very legal sense that helps you to ensure your obligations under Article 28. I believe we are turning to more or less the end of our very brief episode, but I would still like to touch upon one very important topic, I believe, and that is the use of codes of conduct for justification of third country transfers of personal data. And having said that, Scope Europe has started an initiative for exactly such code of conduct as an on-top module to the already existing Article 28 basic code to enable transfers of personal data to countries outside the EEA. And for this initiative also has been awarded with the IAPP Annual Privacy Innovation Award 2023, which I believe shows how important this approach is. So I would very briefly like to talk with both of you about this initiative. What is it? What is the goal behind it? What are the issues we are dealing with there? And where do we stand?
I'm sitting next to the co-chairs of the third country module initiative. So I will be very, very brief, and I will give the floor to them. They're both doing a brilliant job in leading this initiative. So I would just like to put it here on the record, my thank you on behalf of Scope's team, on behalf of the EU Cloud CUC General Assembly, because this is, as you mentioned, Thomas, a very, very important work that is being done. And just for clarity, 2 elements on the structure of the code. So as I mentioned, the code does tackle Article 28, and this is indeed a code for processors, only for cloud providers acting as processors. But the way we built it, the idea was to have a comprehensive instrument. One thing that I think I've missed before, this code covers all cloud service layers. And when we are talking about a complex environment such as cloud, this is a very important element that you're covering infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Now, just to introduce the third country module so the audience can understand how this works, basically, we always had the idea of having a modular approach. So we have the baseline code, the Article 28 code, which is approved, as we mentioned, operational. But the idea was to always continue to develop this ecosystem, let's say, considering the needs of the industry, the needs of cloud users, especially. So third country transfers are definitely on top of the list there when it comes to our priorities and the biggest challenges that the industry is facing. So the third country module works as an on-top module. That's once the provider adheres to the baseline code, adheres to Article 28, it can opt to also go through the monitoring body's assessment when it comes to international data transfers. So this is not only for that, we are also working, for instance, on a UK version of the code as well that works as a module. This can be done in the future to further specify implementation within, for example, other sectors that heavily rely on cloud and have a lot of specificities when it comes to their requirements. So yes, this is just to give you the baseline there so they understand where does this module comes in. And now I give the floor to the co-chairs of this initiative.
Thank you, Gabriela, for that. I'll try to be brief, if such a thing is possible when it comes to the international data transfers or cross-border data transfers or third country transfers. I think, to summarize it, when it comes to the motivation for us to take this challenge on, And I'm saying challenge because there is quite a bit of history that goes with cross-border transfers and a lot of lessons that we have learned over the course of last decade. But in summary, what we want to address with the code are two things. We want to provide more legal certainty with alternative transfer method in absence of an adequacy decision, because we have all witnessed that the adequacy decision between the EU and the US has been particularly strained and created quite a bit of uncertainty and issues for compliance for both technology providers in the EU market, which are not necessarily from the EU, and also the EU customers. And on the other hand, in the aftermath of Schrems II decision, which invalidated the privacy shield, what we've learned is that other transfer mechanisms, such as standard contractual clauses, NBCR included, had to be supplemented, so to say, with transfer impact assessment that provide further clarity on the nature and context of personal data processing, together with the assessment of the third country laws and practices that may bring risks to that personal data processing context. And a particular challenge with transfer impact assessment was that they were not standardized, that there were a lot of different formats that were substantively asking for the same checks. So taking into account these two elements, we came up with an idea within the third country transfer module to actually provide standardized way for transfer impact assessments to be done for the purposes of what we call catalogs. And you can think of catalogs under third country transfer module as particular use cases. For example, collaboration platforms or cybersecurity platforms all carry with themselves inherent risk, which is characteristic for their own use case, as the personal data used in those contexts is very similar. So how we see these catalogs is kind of a nutrition labels for particular use cases when the data is transferred to said third countries. So in this way, we are trying to provide more legal certainty by building additional transfer mechanism, and in addition, standardizing the transfer impact assessment for the benefit of the catalog, but also for the benefit of using the TIA in other venues. So this is one of the main benefits of the code, where we are hoping to bring standardization and more legal certainty as we work on it. But I will pass it over to Tomas, because Tomas has been instrumental in this work as well for his reflection on the topic.
Thanks for that, Jelena, especially from you, which means a lot. But yeah, I think you have summed it up pretty well for the moment. I just wanted to add a bit. It's going to be a complex process for the approval, which we have discussed earlier, because we will need that. And we know that transfers of personal data to other countries outside the EEA are considered very problematic by supervisory authorities and courts alike. And it's also a very political thing. So we will see where we get and where that ends. Right now, the status quo is that we have published a first version for consultation, which is online available. So we are happy to receive feedback on that and to build it in to still improve our idea, which has just been, more or less made up by all the participants who have been dealing with the issues around the post-Schrems scenario over years. And their solutions they have developed. It brings all this expertise together. And that's where we stand. And we're very curious to see how it goes on. And well, having said that, I believe we could talk for this for ages. But unfortunately, we have reached the maximum duration of this episode. And I would like to thank you both very much for your insights. I think it has been very instrumental. And on top of that, thanks for sharing the stage with me, because I believe I've been talking alone here for all the time. It would have been a very dry experience for everyone. And for the audience, congratulations if you made it all through to here. That shows that you're really interested in the topic. And thank you for staying in. I hope we could shed some light onto this very specific topic of GDPR compliance. And well, this is now goodbye from me for this episode. Don't forget to tune in for the next episode of the podcast, and bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Gateway to Privacy. To listen to past episodes and receive notices for new episodes, subscribe by searching Hub Talks, that's HUB Talks, in your favorite podcast app. Tune in next time for more data privacy insights.